21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Wouldn't mind going over to Croatia. I spent a fair amount of time in Europe. I've tried to go to Croatia.
The best thing for you is to take some of your friends and to go sailing.
That's the dream. I gotta go. Actually, my girlfriend and I have kind of idly talked about learning to sail because I really want to go. Yeah. Like the Croatia, the Adriatic, like I want to go to the Mediterranean. Yeah, just like all that. Oh my God.
Then you can go to Greece and
I'm of Greek descent. Not that you can tell because of how pale I am, but it's actually Adamopoulos. You know, it's not Adam.
Beautiful.
They changed the name. Yeah.
There's a reason why you have so much energy and good vibe. You know.
Appreciate that. Well, excited to get going on this.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you for being my guest.
Yeah. All right. Hey, so my name is Sam Adams. I am the co-founder and CEO of dot.LA, which is a media platform that is focused on the Los Angeles tech and startup community and ecosystem that launched last year. And yeah, so my background is I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica specifically, and was always super interested in the media and journalism and how it's evolving. So I'm 29 right now. And so I was, as I was getting involved in that stuff, it was on the backdrop of the entire media business model collapsing, right? Newspapers were shedding journalists and closing in many cases. And, at the time they hadn't quite figured out how to monetize journalism and news media on the internet. We're obviously now doing a better job of that, but it was a very, scary time. And so to be coming into, this industry and caring about it at the time was very, I think that was very formative. So I was very interested in that. I did my undergraduate work at Harvard, where I did some work on the newspaper, but was mainly studying like political and economic theory and, a number of side projects. I spent some time at Cambridge University doing a fellowship. And then coming out of college, knowing that ultimately I wanted to get into the entrepreneurship and operation side of this industry, not exactly knowing how to do that, I actually started as a journalist, as a reporter. I was first at Bloomberg and then I was at Reuters, kind of covering a number of different beats from, telecom to oil to, the courts for a while, things like that. And really enjoyed that, but yeah, wanted to, actually become an operator in the space and really be, not just writing about business, but actually participating in it. So spent a couple of years in consulting. I was at this firm called Activate, which was, spun out of basically some McKinsey consultants, wanted to create a consultancy that was focused on tech and media and operated kind of like a tech startup as well. So it was really interesting. We got to work on, these big projects with legacy media companies that were becoming, trying to modernize and build new digital businesses. And so, especially at a young age, that was a really great experience. And so did that for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, like I wanted to come back to LA. The city seemed very different than the one that I had left. So it wasn't just this kind of Hollywood entertainment economy focused thing. All of a sudden there were just a ton of really interesting tech startups. Probably the most famous of them at the time, and in many ways still now, was like Snapchat and Snap. But there's this whole burgeoning community, and it just felt, really fascinating in a way that I wanted to participate in it. So I wanted to come back to LA, get out of New York. I used business school actually as my way to do that. So I got my MBA at USC, University of Southern California here in LA. And was working basically at Disney. I was doing some like strategy work with them for what's now Disney Plus, and like working with their accelerator a little bit as well. And then right as I was coming out of it, actually, I got linked up with who is now my co-founder and the executive chairman of dot.LA. He's a guy named Spencer Rascoff, who was the co-founder and CEO of. It seems like you have a very international or non-American audience, so it might not be as resonant. But there's a company in America, and I think in some other countries, called Zillow. Do you know Zillow? Mm-hmm. So it's this amazing company. It allows you to find the value of any house. So huge company, and he co-founded it and just stepped down as the CEO after a decade there. And he was also an LA native. We'd actually gone to the same school 20 years apart from each other and had like a number of mutual friends. And so we got linked up, and he said, I just moved back down to LA, and I'm really floored by how much tech and startup activity there is here. And I think that in many ways, what I'm seeing here is similar to what I was seeing in, Seattle 10 years before. And Seattle's obviously like the home of Microsoft and Amazon and Zillow and, a bunch of other really great companies. And 20 years before in like San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And so I think that, LA is really poised to be kind of the next great hub of innovation. But one of the things that it's missing is a news outlet and a media outlet that is going to shine a light on all of this amazing stuff that is happening here. And so it's not, it's things like that, non-Silicon Valley startup hubs are a total white space in media right now, because, for the most part, you have national tech presses like, the tech crunches of the world. And they typically, over-index on writing about the, Silicon Valley, but also, don't have a sense of kind of how clusters and communities work, right? And similarly, the local media, as we were talking about earlier, had totally collapsed, right? And so, the LA Times is actually doing better than it was, 10 years ago, but it is, they're not equipped to cover tech and explain, these talk to the right kind of audiences. And so they, there's this white space. And so we talked and, pretty quickly decided to, start a company that would serve that role and shine a light on the LA tech and startup ecosystem. So it's a startup covering startups, right? So he's our executive chairman. I'm the CEO. This was in like May 2019. And then we spent the rest of the year kind of hammering out what the product was going to be, what the what the voice was going to be, what the team was going to be. We raised $4 million seed round from a bunch of like local VCs and angels. And then we launched in January of 2020, which is a very interesting time to launch anything. And so Absolutely. 6 weeks later, the world's ended. But, and I think on the news side, it's like good that you have a, totally digital product that is very remote work friendly. We had to, our grand plans to do a bunch of events had to go into like virtual events, and, we've only recently restarted in-person stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's been a really great, really exciting couple of years. Yeah, we're just getting started.
any pitfalls, any tipping points? What was your transformation through? I mean, you were working with a lot of big companies. You were on Harvard, on Cambridge.
That's a great question. I think that, I think the biggest thing that was a bit of a learning curve of being an entrepreneur is kind of the sort of loneliness of it at times, because, I'm fortunate to work with a really great team. And my co-founder is an amazing mentor and, a great partner, but, it is like create something new and bring something new into the world, and to be, like so confident about, what it should be, what it should look like, how it should be positioned, and all of those things. Especially like once you have decided to be a founder and, really be like, okay, we have to go from 0 to 1. And how do we do that? Mm-hmm. It's a really unique experience and in some ways a really lonely one, because, like ultimately it's you. And like by definition, there's no one else doing what you're doing, exactly what you're doing, because otherwise you shouldn't be doing it probably. But I think that has been, that was a bit of a learning curve. I think that it's been very curious to, have to do this in large part in this remote environment, right? Where luckily now, the past couple of months, the vaccinations have been ramping up, and and so we actually do have an office again, and our people are going into it every couple of days, a couple of days a week. But yeah, like the idea of, for essentially the first year of us being launched, not really seeing people other than like a very select group, your girlfriend, and, like very, very small group of people. I think that kind of like compounded that effect. And so, I think that has been, that's been a really interesting journey, and one that I think is worth talking about, as founders a little bit more.
If I understood you well, LA is next big thing in the tech industry. I mean, why LA? Different taxes, or
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I think the macro trend is a decentralization of tech and startups away from Silicon Valley, right? I think that even 5 or so years ago, but certainly like 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was this perception that, by definition of it, because of it being a perception becomes a reality, that if you are going to launch a successful tech startup, you need to be, within 25 miles of SFO airport, right? And so, that's where all of the investment money was focused. That's where people would relocate to. And I think that had a lot of kind of like negative knock-on effects that we can go into. But I think that there has been, over the past couple of years, this decentralization and this recognition that like, okay, actually, there are even advantages of like, and really serious advantages, which seems obvious to say now, but wasn't necessarily at the time, of launching, of creating and building companies elsewhere, right? And so you have this rise of these kind of next wave of startup hubs that, you mentioned Texas, like Austin very much is one of them, right? Even within the past couple of months, Miami has kind of come into being seen as like more of a place like this. And similarly, like, Denver
Texas,
and Atlanta and, all this place. And that's just in America, right? And then like in Europe, there's been a rise of tech and tech companies and tech hubs throughout Europe in a way that there hasn't been, and that not even to speak of Africa, which is really rapidly becoming producing some really interesting companies. Asia, obviously, so it's really globalizing. So it's not just in America, but like obviously, I'm American, so I focus on that. But this rise of these new wave of cities, and so I think that's the opportunity. We've talked about building the model in Los Angeles because and then replicating it in all of these other emerging hubs, right, that have these same characteristics. But you asked why specifically LA, right? I think that LA is this really, it lies at this really fascinating intersection between technology, media, entertainment, storytelling, right? And that is this I'm sure that especially for non-American listeners, you think of LA, you think of like Hollywood and Disneyland, things like that. And in many ways, that is the case. And then the interesting thing is Disney's a tech company now, right? Like Disney Plus is a technology product, right? They are, and similarly, Netflix is an entertainment company, right? And so there is this like massive convergence between platforms, right, which are software, right, and involve engineering and and very kind of like a traditional conception of tech, right, as well as content, right? You can't have a platform without good content. You can't have good content without a platform to distribute it. So there is this fundamental convergence between entertainment and technology, right? That is exactly at the heart of kind of what Los Angeles's skill set is, right? And so obviously it's been the hub of storytelling and narrative building and celebrity making and all of those things for 100 years. But there's also there is the tech talent, right? Like so Los Angeles's universities produce more engineers than any other place in the country. And I'm sure internationally I don't have those statistics right on hand, but they between, and it's not just USC or UCLA, there's also a bunch of other Cal State Northridge and the Pomona College, blah blah blah. But in any case, they produce more engineers than anywhere else in the country, but historically they haven't kept them, right? Because then you go up to Silicon Valley to work at a tech company, right? So now and so for any of these companies that are focused on entertainment or media or marketing, building a relationship with consumers and anything media related, I mean, LA is, I think, objectively the best place in the world to tap into those networks and those expertises and those institutions. And then the curious thing is it's such a diverse ecosystem here in a way that I don't think people realize. And that's a big part of what the mission is with dot.LA, to help people realize that. I mean, even within the city, they don't really realize that, but certainly not, across the country or around the world. The aviation, if you look at, SpaceX, and relativity, and there are all these like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory here, and so there's a huge like space industry that's based here that I think flies really under the radar. Similarly, there's like a ton of biotech, and then there's a ton of so it's just this it's this really unique, really diverse, really exciting ecosystem that just totally flies under the radar. And so what we're trying to do is is demonstrate that to people by writing stories about all these great stuff, and creating videos and podcasts and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember you started with biotech back in the late 90s, actually.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that do not understand the power of your biotech, and you're absolutely right, the space industry, etc. And what about,
Totally.
I'm just curious, what about real estate? I mean, the prices, the house price in San Francisco is for making a suicide.
Yeah.
Is it similar in LA, or?
It's better than San Francisco.
Because people from Texas, they are all telling me, well, you need to come to Texas because you can buy a house for peanuts, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I wish the property value, as someone who is not a homeowner yet, and would love to be in Los Angeles, but it is expensive here. It's more affordable than San Francisco, and that's certainly
Silicon
the case.
Valley, probably, yeah.
Yeah, in Silicon Valley. I mean, my sister lives up in Menlo Park, which is right next to Stanford, and yeah, it's like that's like that's the number one worst real estate market in the country, but I think LA is probably number like 3 or something like that. So I wish it was a little better. It is meaningfully better, but than the Bay Area and also New York. But I wish it was better. I could get going on what I think the government should be doing to make that better. But that might be another podcast. But yeah, so absolutely. I think that it's definitely not. I think that there was this perception at the beginning of the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, that, oh, wow, so we're all just living in Zoom, right? I mean, you and I are several thousand miles away from each other right now, but, functionally, it would be the same as if we were, a few blocks from each other, right? You're still looking at the Zoom screen and, talking into it. So I think there was this big perception of like, oh, wow, all these like Facebook engineers who are making a bunch of money, but living in San Francisco. Oh, wow, now they're going to go move to like Boise, Idaho, or something like that, or Texas, right? Outside of Dallas, Fort Worth, or something where you can get for the same price as a studio in San Francisco, you get land and a mansion, right? So
and a few cows,
yeah, exactly. And so as long as you have a fiber internet connection, just go do that. Now certainly that happened to. There were incidents of that, and we covered that and wrote about that kind of stuff. But like, functionally, like I don't think that. I think that while tech is disseminating to being multipolar as opposed to unipolar, right, with the Silicon Valley, I don't think that you're going to see the next great companies come out of like I don't out of like some rural location, right? Like I still think that there is a value to being in like a world capital like Los Angeles or something like that, right? Because just there is there is value to that justifies higher the the higher housing prices, although that is lamentable, I think.
Do you think there is any space left for startups from the basement or garage, by the way?
Yeah, I mean that culture is still,
I mean,
very,
garages are very expensive at the moment. I'm just kidding.
I think that's I think I wouldn't be surprised if like now it's more expensive to rent like a garage in Menlo Park or something as office space than it is to rent like a really nice office, because that there is so much of that like kind of like mythology or like romanticism about that of
sure. So new startups just from the
office. Oh man, if you're if you're two 20-year-old Stanford dropouts working on some software project, and you can interchangeably throw in some combination of like the words crypto, AI, right, like some of these buzzwords, and you're in a garage, like you are going to have a lot of venture capitalists kind of breaking down that door trying to give you a term sheet.
Regarding the ethics, we spoke before we started with the interview. We spoke about the ethics. Any shifts for the past few years?
A really interesting thing about our specific project is kind of the journalistic ethics and the codes around that and the perceptions of it. And so what I mean by that is, we are a media startup that has kind of deep relationships with the investor community here. My co-founder and executive chairman is probably the most prolific angel investor in Los Angeles, and so like naturally, probably like one out of every couple of companies that we write about, there is some kind of maybe second degree relationship with those companies. And so from the very beginning, right when Spencer and I started talking about starting this, we talked a lot about what the lines were going to be and what the structures were going to be about how to make sure that the journalism was independent and unbiased. I mean, he, and I are pretty unashamed, cheerleaders in many ways. I mean, but that's not what journalism should be, right? And so, journalism should be about finding the truth and shining a light on the truth, and following the truth wherever it goes, right? And so, I'm reminded of when I first started at Bloomberg News. They make everyone read Michael Bloomberg's autobiography, and also there's a book called The Bloomberg Way, where the editor-in-chief Matt Winkler talks about a similar conversation that he had with Michael Bloomberg when Winkler was a bonds reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and Michael Bloomberg was trying to recruit him to start this news organization based on the Bloomberg terminal, which, for those who don't know, is like you pay, anyone related to finance, you pay $20,000 a year for this, terminal that gives, that has a ton of financial data. So as they were talking about this, the anecdote as it was relayed was Winkler, before he agreed to join, gave Michael Bloomberg a hypothetical scenario in which they had uncovered some, true and newsworthy, but but negative and unflattering story about the CEO of a bank that was one of the biggest purchasers of Bloomberg terminals, right? And then the CEO of this company hears about this story that's about to be published and calls Michael Bloomberg and says, if this story runs, like, I'm canceling all of these subscriptions, right? And we're no longer going to be a client of Bloomberg. And so he says, Michael, like, what would you do in that situation, right? And Bloomberg thinks about it, for a second, and then says, okay, so I mean, if it's true and fair, then do it, and I'll deal with whatever business consequences arise therein. So, I found that passage to be fairly instructive when Spencer and I were first talking about this sort of stuff. In the very early days, when we were sketching out, what this would look like and how this would work and all of that. And so basically I, framed him some version of that question. I was like, so what do you think, how do you think we would play it? He said the same thing. And so we, we both very fundamentally believe in the necessity and the power of independent journalism, right? And I don't think that what we're not is combative for the sake of being combative, because I think that there are a lot of media outlets that just are antagonized kind of for the sake of it, which I don't think is particularly useful or appeals to particularly good parts of the social psyche. But similarly, what we don't do is just kind of only write stories that the people who are being covered want to see, because that's not journalism, that's PR. And so at that point you might as well just have a press release website, right? Because that doesn't do anyone any good. It's not respected, it's not interesting. It's like so when we were raising our seed round, we communicated very clearly to all of our investors, actually made them sign a pledge to this effect, saying, like, your relationship with your financial relationship with us does not entitle you to any any special treatment in terms of coverage, either positive or negative, or for you or your portfolio companies or anything like that. And to their credit, all of our investors did, totally understood, why that was so important. And, we've never, so fortunately, I've never gotten that kind of a call of like, hey, if this happens, we're going to do X, Y, Z. But what we have, what we have gotten on multiple occasions is a lot of, the angry outreaches from, fairly powerful people that didn't like something that we wrote about it. But look, I consider that to be part of my job, right? Of, say, okay, so, was the story accurate? Yeah. Was it like, you might not consider it to be fair, but like, was it, sort of objectively fair? Yeah. Okay. Well, then we will completely defend, our journalists. Right. And so, so that has, that has actually come up less in the year and a half that we've been launched compared to what I thought might be the case. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's just very, very important, because I think that there's industry wide, there's a reevaluation of like, of of kind of what these ethical standards are, kind of what is sort of an outmoded relic of a previous age in media, because I think that, there are certainly like, journalism schools and, a lot of like more old school newsrooms will have a lot of like, the business teams and the editorial teams, like they don't talk to each other. They're not even on the same floor. Like there's a complete separation of that. I think that, that's kind of silly and not reflective of like a modern, 2020 media organization. That's not to say that like, that's not to say that business considerations, it can influence editorial coverage at all. That said, actually, like this week, we were negotiating with a certain company about them sponsoring a video series. And then I noticed that we had just published a story about the CEO had said some very inadvisable comments that our journalists had picked up and written about. And I was like, oh shoot, that might affect this degree. But that is what it is, right? Like it's because if you go too far on compromising on that, then you've lost the thread, right? And so there's really no point in what you're doing, right? What are you doing at that point? And so yeah, it's been really interesting navigating that. I've been pleasantly not surprised, but I've been pleasantly reinforced that the way that we had originally kind of scoped this out was, I think, the right approach for it. We haven't had any anything that I would consider to be a misstep ethically on that. But it is, it's just a really fascinating time because so much is changing in the media and in journalism, and who is a journalist and all that, and so it's just such a fascinating time. And so to be able to play like some small part in like thinking through kind of what the new model should be, is something that I find to be really exciting.
Do you have support for that kind of thinking? For that kind of approach, what was the attitude of media representatives, other media representatives, when you speak with them, or their reactions?
Yeah, it's interesting. I try to talk to as many peers as possible. Whether it's like in a startup media company or a more established one, and I think that there's a lot of kind of information and perspective sharing, because it is, these are, radically changing times in the industry. And so I think it's always good to be kind of sharing notes and sharing thoughts with, with folks confronting similar issues at peer organizations. It's something that my co-founder and I talk about a fair amount. It's something that, we talk about with the newsroom and, with our managing editor, and, really trying to, I do not pretend for a moment that, that I'm infallible on this kind of stuff, or that, it's my instinct is always to bring as many smart people with different perspectives into the conversation as possible, because I think that always improves the outcome.
How do you take that kind of attacks when they happen? How do you keep your positive energy and focus? Do you meditate? Do you meditate?
Do I meditate? I do meditate, actually. Cool. I'd like to do it more do it kind of like sporadically. Sometimes I get into a habit of doing it, like 4 or 5 times a week. Sometimes it goes a couple of weeks. So I need to kind of hone that practice a little bit more. I run a lot. I think that's also kind of a meditative act for me as well. And it's, I mean, in
What's
some ways,
your
it seems
mindset?
like your question was about like mindset and staying positive and eye on the prize and all of that. And look, I'd be lying if I said that hasn't been a challenge at various times. And this has been I think for everyone a pretty challenging year and a half. And so there are certainly times when there are certainly times when you can kind of lose the plot on that a little bit. And so but yeah, I mean, I think that try to just get outside and exercise, and that's that's actually the one benefit of LA that I haven't really the obvious part that hasn't come up of it's a nice place to be outside. And so you should try to take advantage of that as much as possible. But yeah, I think that just trying to stay centered, keep things in perspective, I think is always an overarching goal. And be just try to be kind to yourself, ultimately is the kind of goal there, and to others. I'd love to encourage the audience to subscribe to .LA. It's, that's the URL. So dot.LA. I think it's even if you don't have a specific interest in Los Angeles tech and startups, I think we're doing some pretty interesting stuff. And I think that your audience would probably enjoy that. So encourage them to sign up for like the newsletter. Maybe if you're ever out here, try to come to one of our events or and things like that. But yeah, just thank you so much for having me, and it's just a really fun conversation.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.